Hello, everyone. It is truly an honor to be a part of the Absalon Shiny Conference once again with this very special edition of the Shiny Developer Series of live recording from right here at the Shiny Conf. So again, my sincere thanks to everyone for inviting us from the program committee. I got an inside look at that this year, and these talks are absolutely amazing, and it is going to be such a fun few days we have here at the conference. And I'm really excited to lead this very fun panel discussion that we're going to have on the recent innovations in the Shiny community, some of our stories, how we've been using Shiny to supercharge our products in production, and some of our favorite tooling along the way. So let's not wait any longer. Let's bring up our exciting panel here. Let's start off with Tanya Cashoralli, who is the founder of TCB Analytics, a data and analytics consulting company. She makes her return. We had her on last year as well and had great discussions about her take on consulting with Shiny. She also runs a great community network of data scientists, and she's a frequent speaker at tech conferences. So welcome back, Tanya.
Thanks, Eric. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. And then up next, we have Jon Harmon. I'm sure you've seen John's name quite a bit because he helps run the R for Data Science online learning community, one of my favorite resources in the community, and it's certainly a great service that Jon provides to us. And he's been a huge proponent of Shiny. So, Jon, we're excited to have you on as well.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. Up next, we have Nicola Rennie, who is a data scientist and trainer at Jumping Rivers. She's also been a huge proponent of Shiny and using R in many innovative ways. I've been admiring her a lot, and a lot of her content gets featured on R Weekly quite a bit. So, Nicola, we're happy to have you as well.
Yeah, very happy to be here.
Excellent. And then up next, we have Pedro Silva, who comes from right here at Absalon. He is a front-end and Shiny developer. He comes from the world of web development, and he's been a huge fan of Shiny ever since. And he and I have no shortage of opinions on great novel uses of technology in this space. So, Pedro, great to have you here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And rounding out our panel is Peter Solymos, who I'm so happy to have on the Shiny Dev Series. This has been a long time coming. He is a senior data scientist at eSource and also the co-founder of Analythium, one of my favorite resources of using Shiny in all ways of production and novel uses of technology. And you'll be hearing from him later in the conference on his amazing talk about his work with Shiny as a desktop app. So, Peter, great to have you here. All right. Hopefully, Peter, we'll get your audio sorted out. I don't think I heard you there, but okay. Well, it wouldn't be a live conference without some technical fun here, but we'll dive right into it. We got a lot to talk about. We got a great set of topics we're going to discuss here, but also I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as best I can, and we'll save some time at the end for audience Q&A as well. But let's dive right into it. And first, as I mentioned, we're going to be centering a lot of this talk around innovation. And frankly, even just in this past year or of a recent time, we've seen so many new developments around making your app development more efficient, improving user experiences, and frankly, much more. So my first question to the panel is, are there particular areas in the Shiny ecosystem that have been quite innovative that have you really excited to kind of take your development to the next level?
I'll join in. The visual UI editor, I think, is going to be a really big game changer for just really quickly iterating on apps.
Yeah, that's an amazing idea. I mean, frankly, I've been wanting that ever since Shiny was first invented. I can think of this as a great way to do wireframing of your application with stakeholders so that instead of me trying to frantically code it up on the spot, I can literally point to say, here's where the input should be, here's where the output should be, and then making that in essence self-contained so that I can use that as my design interpretation later on. But Nicola, it sounds like you're a big fan of that as well, right?
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. That very quick wireframing when you're sitting down with stakeholders or clients to try and build an app. It's hard to write code and be in a meeting at the same time. And if you are sitting down with a client in person, it's a click and drag interface. They can click and drag the elements around and sort of build their own Shiny app, and then we can go away and polish it. So it's been very useful in that sense.
Awesome to hear. Yeah. Other thoughts from the rest of our panelists here?
I still have to try it for myself, but I think that is going to be huge, especially that you're not just shooting in the dark, but it is going to be kind of a common framework where you arrive together, because writing the backend and the code, no one is really going to take it out of your hand, but the UI, getting it right from the get-go is really important, and this is going to be a great help, and I'm pretty sure those of you who have tried can speak to that. Sorry, I was jumping in there.
Oh, absolutely. I love it. And Tanya, looks like you have some thoughts as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, currently we typically use Balsamic, or there's a few other wireframing tools we've used, but we won't need to pay for that anymore. So as a startup, we love that. That's one thing. But yeah, I remember like years ago wanting to make my own sort of templates, so to speak, for Shiny, where I'm always like looking up code, like, how do I do this drop down again? How do I do this date range filter? How do I do, this data table? And now it's like, I don't even have to do that. And just being able to do that drag and drop is just huge. And no matter, I've been making Shiny apps for a long time, and I still need to look up things so just that little bit of time savings will be awesome.
It's amazing how much that pays off. And certainly as someone who's used Shiny from the very beginning, yes, I do admit I still have to look up a few things around event reactives and things like observe event, like, oh, do I need to knit that right away or not? Like, it all happens. So the more time you can save on these details, the better, time you have for the real hard stuff that often comes with Shiny development.
I would maybe add that I think as developers we all have our favorite snippets, and I think UI snippets are no different. There's always some drawer in the back where you kind of keep your favorite stuff. I think the Shiny UI, especially for wireframing, kind of gives you a way of building these without actually having to save them. So it lets you scaffold the beginning of your app much easier. But I'm also very hopeful for where this will lead us, because I think it's not uncommon for a framework to eventually evolve into a UI, into a UI builder, into a web builder. I think probably the most flagrant example of this is WordPress, where you have a drag and drop builder for your pages, and funnily enough, WordPress is not a JavaScript framework or anything, but that builder is also built in React. So I wouldn't be surprised if we just see more and more refined solutions for these UI builders, and who knows how this will also change the structure of the applications themselves, because then you need to kind of work around the structure that you get for the code.
Yeah, it's excellent to see the fact that, those of us that use Shiny from the early days, let's face it, design was not always our first thought in mind. But when you get in the trenches, if you will, when you start putting these in production, you're putting these in the hands of non-data scientists, non-statisticians, who frankly might be spoiled by some of the web, resources they find online. And design comes up earlier than you might expect. So the fact that we have tools to help make this easier, I think, is going to be a huge win as you start to scale up your development to production context. Now, speaking of innovation, literally just a few days before we started this recording, we've seen the announcement of a huge shift in technology that may or may not have implications to the Shiny ecosystem, and that is the announcement of WebR, which again was kind of preceded by the advent of Shiny for Python, which has also generated quite a bit of excitement, and not just giving, Python developers a way to build Shiny apps, but also the idea of sharing your applications in a browser. So I'm curious from here on our panel, what are your thoughts on this amazing technology and where that might lead to the Shiny community as a whole?
I guess I can go first. I'm super excited. I was actually playing around with it last year when the first version kind of came out. I think there's a lot of potential here. Like you mentioned, for running things in the browser to avoid having to pay for bigger servers and just move a lot of this heavy computation that we do to the client browser. This is a given. This is, even if it doesn't support Shiny from the start, I believe eventually it will. But even if it doesn't, right now you're already able to move some of the computation that you do to the browser just by using WebR. So you can technically have R in the server, R in the browser, and just run some of the things in the server, some of the things in the browser, and this already helps a lot. So I expect to start seeing more and more tools for this. I think parallelization was a big topic some time ago. How do we run a lot of stuff at the same time without paying for really big servers? This could be a way. This could be a way to that.
I'm also very excited, and I can see a huge potential. Although right now what's out there is pretty basic, and mostly you can do it in JavaScript with JSON, but this is not going to stay the same way. And I think in a pre-show discussion, we were joking that maybe by today there's going to be something new, and we can just imagine what's going to happen next, because how people jumped on it and just created awesome stuff in 2 days was amazing. And I think that's just going to exponentially continue into the future. And the huge benefit is for teaching, because as someone who has had workshops here and there and very different audiences, one might come there without a laptop, and then others might have difficulties installing anything. This is just going to be a huge game changer when it comes to really basic R setups and teachings, and everything that you can easily compile in WebAssembly, and everything else, Shiny and C++, those hurdles are going to come and eventually be overcome. I'm pretty confident about that, because we saw that in the Python side already. So I can't wait.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to when it's available within package down for the websites for packages, being able to run code and see if it actually works how you think it's going to work before you bother installing it on your system. I think that's going to be amazing. It will be interesting to see if it eventually leads to like splitting of the server function. Is this server function to run on your server, or is it server function to run in the browser? It'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, I love that thought, Jon, about if you discover a great package, but you don't necessarily want to commit to having it on your system right away. I touch on this a little bit in our weekly highlights I just dropped this morning, but the idea that I could try this out without any cost to my system and get a feel for it before making the commit to installing it, I think is going to make accessing these innovations even easier, especially for those that might be in a more controlled environment where you can't necessarily install everything at once, but you could at least try this out, share with a colleague and say, hey, we should probably invest in this. I can see huge advancements in the package ecosystem with WebR as a way to try things out as a potential sandbox of sorts.
Yeah, likewise. I think one of the big benefits for WebR is from teaching, and I think it's you can see how much the R community loves it, how quickly things have been developed, and that there's already sort of extensions for Quarto that you can have WebR code chunks, so you can create teaching materials that students can interact with, and they don't need a laptop. You can run examples for teaching courses on your phone, for example, as well, which is very, very interesting.
Yep, just gonna echo that sentiment. We've done a lot of trainings and having to figure out what OS they're on and computers, and if IT needs to get involved and installing packages. This is definitely a game changer and something that didn't think was going to happen this soon, actually. So pretty excited about it.
Yeah, the engineering behind it is amazing. Certainly, we got a tease of this back at the PositConf or our Studio Conf last year, but there is a ton of work involved in this. And yeah, we are still early. So certainly there is a bit of a JavaScript knowledge base that you'll need to have in order to build one of these from the ground up. But as we all said, this is just beginning. Just imagine a year from now where this goes. And frankly, I see opportunities where this can be a component of a broader backend system where Shiny might still be involved, but then WebR is going to help with things behind the scenes. Maybe the user doesn't even realize it, but it definitely is giving us more potential to really find an optimal architecture that, again, I think can be great for, like you said, teaching purposes. I have my eye on potentially using this to share effective applications with key people, another topic I'll touch on later in this conference, but I think it's the potential is massive here. And certainly for me, and probably most of you on this panel as well, we're going to be watching this really closely to see what the community has to offer here.
Maybe I would just add one final use that I don't see being spoken very often, which is, so I think this first half of the day was clearly modules. So encapsulation. I also really like the idea of WebR bringing the possibility of creating fully encapsulated applications, either for mobile or for desktop, where you don't actually need to have anything installed in the system. Everything just runs in a nice little module package. Yeah. And the last one, I also want to echo the idea of using this in the server. We've seen these with other languages where WebAssembly is actually used to orchestrate like very complex microservices systems. Maybe there's also some potential there for help scaling Shiny and R to 1,000, 10,000 users.
That's always been a very hot topic as we think about, the uses of Shiny in different contexts of production, which can mean a lot of different things to different people, but having that high availability, having a way to share this, whether it's a large organization or an app to the whole world, you want to make sure that you give that great user experience to everybody when they're accessing it. So I could see WebR playing a key role in the concept of scaling as well. And then other techniques that frankly are a bit more mature right now that I think are effective innovations in this space. It's not new per se, but I think the idea of having efficient backend processing with, say, a Plumber API on the back end can be great for separating out concerns, if you will, of what your app is doing on its own and letting another service handle some pretty, say, powerful or efficient computations. And I think that's a great place for people to invest in. But in our pre-show that we did a couple of days ago, getting started with Plumber does have a little bit of, a bit of a learning curve. So would anyone like to chime in on their experiences, perhaps with using Plumber as a backend?
Of course, I was just waiting for that prompt. I think
I aim to please.
Plumber is really awesome as a backend, but we also shouldn't forget about that there was OpenCPU. There is still OpenCPU, and at least 5 or 6 maybe other frameworks out there like Fiery, Ambiorix. I can remember all the names, but there's a lot which all converge to the same idea of these GET and POST and other requests, and making sure that all those headers are right, and usually passing data back and forth as JSON or some kind of binary. And I can see Plumber, or I have seen Plumber being used quite heavily, especially when someone starts out with a Shiny app. And we've had clients who had similar issues that, this Shiny app has now reached its limits, and we want the UI to be nicer. And that means the backend is still going to be our code because we already have there. And in fact, can we turn that into a package and then deploy it as an API? And that way it just becomes really scalable. And then you can all of a sudden find other kinds of developers who might be really an expert in infrastructure or just React, and then kind of stitch that all together so that it still retains the full backend business logic that you already had put together. And I think that's where really Plumber is shining, so to say.
Yeah, excellent thoughts. Others want to chime in on other back end ideas?
Just sticking on Plumber for a second, I just would really like to see something along the lines of shinyapps.io for Plumber. Right now, it does take a bit to get going with Plumber. Once you're really using it, okay, you probably want to have your server that's scaled right for it or whatever. But just getting to know it, it's hard to get over that hurdle, I feel like.
Yeah, certainly techniques that I think Peter and I in particular have been pushing a lot is the idea of containerization as a way to get started. But I know for sure, and I've commented this on the podcast quite a few times, that's not for the faint of heart. It does take a learning curve to get up and running, and what host do you use for that container service? There's a lot of moving parts there. So
I was going to say that containerization is like step 6. Like there are things you have to do before you can use that container.
Yes, I would say that is maybe step 2, and that is something that we can make it much, much easier than currently is, or in fact, there are ways to just stick it in there. But then the next step is, okay, how does that container gets deployed, where it gets deployed, how that cluster becomes live, what kind of cluster are we talking about? And we've done some templating around functions that I used, not just Plumber, but other things there, and how to split up the API into functions or just deploy it in a monolithic framework is also some of the questions you have to answer. So you really need to think it through, and I see no easy way to get to that point right now. And maybe this is something where some of us can also help the ecosystem to develop a bit more.
Yeah, the tooling is there, right? But now it's how do we harness this so that it's more accessible to a wider range of developer skill sets? That's always, let's face it, that's one of the reasons I started the Shiny Developer Series, as a way to bring some of these concepts to the Shiny community in ways that hopefully can get ideas spurned on how we can make these resources even better. So I think this fundamental concept of just basically don't make your app do everything at once. I've been there. I've done it. I've had monolithic apps. I try to do everything under the sun, and boy, did I pay for it. And a lot of my users did too. So as long as we have these alternatives, but the idea is that we want it to be almost like a plugin type architecture. Just bring it in, have it hosted very efficiently, and then you see the benefits right away. So you want to minimize that upfront cost to get into these different paradigms, which if you're not coming from software engineering, you're learning all this on the fly. Trust me, I've been there. I had a minor in computer science, but I was not a software engineer by any means. So a lot of these have been learned in the trenches, but I think we're seeing a lot of tooling that can potentially help many developers along the way.
Yeah, especially that, and probably someone is going to make software as a service out of this already. But there's a lot of really good examples of places that just let you host your APIs. This is super common for JS. Maybe there's something there. A plumberapps.io style of service that just lets you host your package and create some actual API that you can use for whatever apps you need. Whoever has to deal with the scaling of that, good luck, because we are talking about R, but who knows?
Yeah, future's bright. If somebody gets a startup idea, we just gave it to you. Good luck, though. But yeah, those are all excellent points, and it's kind of a nice segue. We've been talking about a bit about tips we've learned along the way, but certainly as I think about developing the applications that I typically do in my day job, it's always a journey, sometimes a very long journey, and it does get quite interesting when it leaves your machine and you get others to use it, whether it's just in your organization or you're sharing it completely in the wild. And we had a very entertaining discussion about this in the pre-panel meetup we had. But I'm curious from all of you on the panel, any lessons or other stories you want to share with what happened once you shared your application with others. And Jon, I think you and I bonded on one particular issue with respect to, well, I hate to say it, time zones.
Oh God, yes. Tan Ho had a thing on Twitter this week about working with time zones, and then that led to we're having a conversation on the conference Slack about the time zones. Like, there's a time zone in Australia that is off by it's like 10 and a half hours in the summer and 11 hours in the winter, or vice versa. I can't remember. There are the 15-minute time zones in Nepal, and there's one in Australia, and one other place that I can't remember right now. Just time zones are awful, and they make things hard. But you can, like, they're in the browser. That is data that is available, and so you can make it just kind of work. That there are ways to detect what the user time zone is and deal with that. But if you don't think it through, like I had something where I was having people choose times on the hour, but on the hour isn't on the hour for everybody. So that's why I think about these half hour and 15-minute time zones. That UI didn't make sense. Well, it made sense to the user. What they were choosing wasn't actually what I was saving, though. So just having that information, dealing with that is always tricky.
Yeah, excellent points. And yes, I'm getting flashbacks to when I built this rather silly shiny streamer calendar app that was a great learning process. But boy, in fact, Tan was probably watching one of those live streams where I tried to hack it all together. But once I found that little snippet in JavaScript client side, I was like, oh my gosh, I've solved it. But how long did it take me to solve it? That's a different issue altogether. So you learn all that a hard way, I guess. Yeah, others want to chime in on? Yeah, sorry,
I think it's a good way to show a developer how much you hate him, is to get him to work with time zones. This is definitely not an R problem. It's
Oh, no.
consistent across every single language. I would maybe add here things that are tricky and really important. Documentation. I think when people start using your stuff, things that were very clear for you, very easy, they just seem like easy things. They might not always be. Some of these things might be just because you're so familiar with the code base. Having good documentation, having ideally even online documentation that your users can somehow find. This is great. And of course, shout out to Package Down, maybe with WebR coming, so you can run the examples right away. But Package Down, Oxygen documentation, READMEs, vignettes, all of that good stuff. Make sure you ship your product with it as well.
Yeah, I think that's excellent for both kind of the users of your app, but also for developing the app, that development journey, those notes that you can share. And one of the approaches I've taken recently, and it wouldn't be a Shiny Dev Series episode without plug for Golem, but in my Golem apps, I often use the vignettes to sketch out some different elements of the app. Maybe it's a back-end thing, maybe it's a front-end thing, just to document those ideas. And then that's kind of like a catalog of how I can use that to learn in the future how I might approach that problem, but also historical context, because I don't know about all of you, but if I'm like a year or two away from a major app I developed, I don't remember heads or tails why I chose the things I did. So having those notes is a massive help.
Yeah. To add to the list of post-deployment issues, one of the things we often have to do is sort of pass accessibility testings for clients. And we have in the past sort of built an app and then tried to make it accessible. And that is quite difficult, particularly when you've done things like added input widgets from external packages or sort of interactive graphics. It becomes really difficult to do things like add alt text if you have interactive graphics where a user can change what the plot looks like. How do you update that? So for us, sort of thinking about accessibility from day one, I think is a good lesson to have learned. it makes it much easier to sort of pass those tests in the future if you plan it out to make it accessible from the start.
Yeah, it's a mindset, right? Because I remember when I first started Shiny, that was honestly the last thing on my mind. And first of all, that's not the right mindset. It should be on the first thing in mind. But I think now over the years that Shiny's been around and we've seen some great resources in the community to help you get started with accessibility, both from just the Shiny perspective itself, but also easier ways for you to assess in different stages of your development if you're meeting those checks, you're meeting those requirements, so you're not surprised later on when you do deploy that you get feedback that, oh, I can't access that element or not getting the right metadata around it. So it is definitely important to have that mindset early on.
My story from the trenches goes back to not just Shiny, but everything that users are faced with, and that can be plain HTML or anything in the background. They're not going to see that. What they're going to see is the design and the colors on the map, and that's what they're going to react to. And I've been doing lots of templating and static sites because eventually it comes down to how often the data behind the app is changing. And when it's once a year, there's no point in putting their Shiny, especially if there are like thousands of pages that you want to display with very similar information. And early on, like my brand is scientist, and that's where I'm coming from. And I wanted to make sure that the science is right. And okay, here you go. And all the feedback I received is that this is ugly. We don't like the colors. And I agreed with that, right? That was true, but that was not the point from my end. And I had to learn that really quickly that, well, they're not going to talk to me about the science if the UI and the UX is not up to a certain level. So I had to up my game on that point, and I still continue to learn.
But to me, that's a good thing. When the client is only complaining about colors, that means everything's working.
It can also mean that they haven't actually like looked at everything else yet.
Exactly. So, or they don't know whether it's working.
Yeah.
They haven't tested it at all, but their first concern is color.
Yeah.
I was gonna say this is what I could talk about for like hours. The whole journey of building Shiny apps, but luckily, none of our challenges are usually technical. It's always people asking the right questions, getting people to test, getting people to define their requirements. And when I say define requirements, what question are you actually trying to solve or answer?
Yes.
Because I want to throw a bunch of stuff on a chart and I want to add a bunch of filters, but why? Like, I will design this based around how you're going to use it. And I can design it in a smart way if I know how you're going to use it. And oftentimes they don't know. So, I think like a scientist. I come from a biotech computational science background, but most of my clients don't. A lot of them don't. So it's very hard. That's been the hardest thing, I think, for us, is like going from idea, wireframe, development, and then building something very quickly, and then having people think it's a finished product, number one. Number two, not having enough testing resources typically, like on just the whole side of things, from the UI testing, Shiny testing, but like, can we validate that all the SQL's right or all the queries we're performing are correct? And you could do a lot in a short amount of time, but I think it's like that. With great responsibility comes great, or with great power comes great responsibility. And that's how I feel about Shiny, like
Absolutely.
every day.
Great.
Yeah. And little bonus story, you all didn't hear this in the pre-meeting, but bonus story time for me. I have an app at work that I've been working on for over 5 years. It is definitely the most complex thing I've ever done in Shiny. It's interfacing with HPC systems. It is doing a very complex algorithm for multiplicity control. And I'm pretty proud of it. I must dare say I've learned a lot in my journey with it. Now, I have a colleague that's made another app that's definitely very powerful as well. It's named after a superhero, so he's got a great branding for its name. My app's name is not after a superhero, and the first thing a very key executive noticed when we were doing like one of these group showcases of things we developed in our team, he said, "I don't like that name." Nothing about what the app was doing. He just didn't like the name of it. The name, people, the name. Okay, that's that was a push button moment for me, but I I'm still going to keep it the same name. I like it, but it's so just amazing. Just to Tanya's point, the app itself, yeah, it technically quite challenging, but in the end, it's how the people are receiving it and where the change management's going to be, and getting those issues right is never an easy process. But yes, the name of all things.
There's a Portuguese saying which basically translates to "the eyes also eat," and it's basically
Yes.
about how important it is the way something looks. And I think especially when it comes to applications, Shiny applications, a lot of the time they come for the way it looks, but they stay for what it can do. So a lot of this stuff is it's funny because a lot of these topics are kind of related. The way it looks, the UI, the UX of how it behaves, and how the user story fully translates to the app. How many there's a lot of improvements that you can do in the workflow of people just by moving a button to a different site. And all of these are super hard to understand unless you actually manage to talk with the people that will use the application. So this is definitely something that I recommend. If the first thing when you're building an app, can I talk with the people that will actually use this? Do you have someone that I can talk to? And even things like this also include accessibility, like Nicola was saying. I don't think that there is still like a very well-defined accessibility standard for Shiny applications, which is funny because the Shiny application is still a web application, and this is actually a very well-defined world in itself. If you want to know more, just Google Web Accessibility Application Initiative, Web Accessibility Initiative, and there's a ton of rules of how you can create components for a web page, and they will follow all the accessibility rules. So there's a lot of stuff like those small pop-ups, or the colors, is the contrast high enough, is the size high enough? All of these really help with the user experience, and you never know when someone that needs accessibility is going to use your app. And this is definitely something that when you go into production is something also to take into consideration.
I have a question which relates to accessibility, but also UI, UX, and I'm asking the panel now, maybe you have a good solution for this. Let's say you have several palettes for maps that can be colorblind friendly, and you send out a poll to users, which one do you like? 5 palettes, you get back a uniform response from, let's say, dozens of people,
Sure.
which is not really helping you to decide, but what it shows you is whichever you pick, 80% of the people won't like it. What do you do in this case?
I think in that case, for me, when it comes to accessibility, the way to be most accessible is to give people choice, whether that's what palette it is, what font does it look like, is it dark mode or light mode. So if you have 5 palettes and they're all colorblind friendly, give them 5 options and let them sort of pick for themselves is one way around it to try and please 100% of your users with your color choices.
It's also important to remember that there's different types of color blindness, so you won't be able to find one solution fits all for everything. And I don't remember the name, but there's a really good Chrome plugin that will actually change the way a page looks specifically for the color. So if you want to test a color scale at some point, you can just click a button and it will basically change the way that the page looks as if you had a specific type of color blindness. And this really helps you with color scales. Sometimes it's crazy. You have like 10 completely different colors, and then you see it with that specific filter. And it's like, oh, there's like 2 colors here. It's impossible to distinguish anything.
This brings up a question for me to either the audience or the panel. So let's say someone can save a color blindness palette that they like on the Shiny app. Maybe we make that a feature. Because I've had this come up before, where a client wants to save a very sophisticated search, for example, in there only they could see it. We have the session variable, right? But is there a package or something that makes it easy to kind of like save and store all those things? Because you don't necessarily need a full-blown database for this, right? Maybe it's SQLite if you want to get fancy, but is it like, should we store a bunch of things in a JSON file? Like, I've just kind of gone back and forth thinking about this of like, what's the best way to kind of store user preferences from the session variable?
I mean, I would say store it in a cookie.
Yeah, you would,
And
right?
you can use the cookies package from CRAN.
Package. See, I learn about a new package every day.
Yeah.
That's the
So
road
I got sick of trying to figure out the answer to this question, and so I wrote a package. And so
Of course.
there you go.
There's your quote for the episode. I got in a package.
I'm glad I asked.
There you go.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
Now I can email you when I get stuck, hopefully.
Well,
Hopefully you won't get stuck. So
yeah, that's the idea,
But yes,
right? You took away the pain point for them, right?
yeah, that's the goal.
So I can tell you how I've tackled it. I'd love to hear other thoughts too, is that I've piggybacked off of the Shiny bookmarking state feature, which does have a bit of overhead to get in, but it is, I'm going to call it customizable. So what I've done is there are two modes of bookmarking. You can do the bookmarking so they get a link that restores all the inputs with various additions to the URL. But if you have a lot of inputs, that's going to get way too long and it's going to be a nightmare to load. So full disclosure, we've been hosting on what's now Posit Connect, our formerly Shiny Server Pro back in the day. And we would store the bookmark server side, but I hacked it, customized it so that it would actually store on their user directory within the Linux system so that it was personal to them and that it was always there when they went back the next day, and they could pick from the different sessions they bookmarked. So they did something on day one that they liked, then they did some different thing on day two. I call them projects. So you can engineer the heck out of this, but I'd say probably the first pass. I'm liking John's cookie package as a first pass to it. But yeah, how have others tackled this? If you have,
if you can save it in the browser, save it in the browser, so you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
But if you do need some, I understand that sometimes the database might seem like it's a bit too much, but maybe it's not. And there's definitely other approaches of just storing these as base files or encrypt them somehow, because security also plays a bit of a role here. I think your solution will depend a lot on the actual needs of the feature. If you don't care about if it's something super simple, you just want to, for example, store user settings. I would store these in the browser and just load them at the start. If we're talking about more sensitive information, probably a database is something that you can manage a bit. If it's some information you need to log, you just want to know that this information exists, I think Eric's solution is really good. I would keep it out of the project folder if you can, because you never know when that code might be replaced.
Sure.
But at this point, you could use a lot of different ways of storing these.
Yeah, and I use a lot of shinyapps.io, so it may be like storing something encrypted on S3 or something, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I've experimented with that too. Of course, then you got the overhead of making sure you can talk to the S3 API and getting all the authentication stuff baked in. But yeah, there's always engineering you have to do if you want to go away from the browser specific side of it. Yep.
Maybe a Plumber API.
Hey, all comes full circle, doesn't it? Yep. And by the way, if you're not watching the chat, I'm going to try and copy the chat after this because I'm seeing a boatload of resources for accessibility testing and other resources. So definitely keep an eye on that for everybody to think about in their journey with Shiny and accessibility in the future. One area I'll say in the trench story that I have, besides the little name thing I had, is that I often in my apps use an assortment of HTML widgets. We often hear about DT or Plotly or many of the others. There comes a time when you're using this widget and it does like 98% of what you want to do. But there is just that extra 2% that you wish you could just get into the code and do one little tweak to a callback or another, enhancement to the package. And dealing with those has always been one of my biggest pain points. So certainly what I'm trying to do these days is try to get a little better with kind of how these widgets are constructed, because once you know a little bit under the hood of what's going on, it seems like it's easier to customize. But sometimes I find myself in that situation where if I just had that extra little bit of knowledge, and I could supercharge my experience much better. So I don't know if any of you have experienced similar stories with additional packages you've used in your apps and trying to customize them a bit.
Yeah, with D3 especially, we do a lot of custom graphics or charts. And honestly, I pull in D3 developers. That's my solution.
There we go. Yep.
I've wrestled with, doing some of it myself, and I can only get so far. And I that's why I always look for a package where it does at least gets me, like, if it could get me 85% of the way there, if it's enough for the client. But as soon as they get to that more customization, aspect, we built our own HTML widgets. And yeah, it's really cool though, because they can then take that widget, do whatever they want with it, embed it anywhere. They can own it. So yeah, that's it's hard to find D3 developers that have some shiny experience, but I have a couple.
Good. Other
I
thoughts?
think D3 is also a bit of a specific case because it has it's its own world. You need to learn. You need to learn the language just for this. I often also approach this as I think a lot of the widgets that you can get are typically kind of easy to hack if you have the right skills. Things like, for example, changing the styles of a button, even though the button doesn't allow it. If you know a bit of HTML, a bit of CSS, you can wrap that button in your own version of the button, kind of do a couple of changes. Also, always remember that widgets typically load dependencies whenever they're in a package. You can typically also hack into this. You can disable some dependencies. Even if we take the example of wrapping an action button in a different function to make your own action button, you can technically remove some of the dependencies or even add more dependencies there. So this is also typically a way that you can kind of productionalize these variants of the different widgets, because you can kind of remove some stuff and add some other stuff. And at the end, you can wrap it in your own package on top of the original package.
Yeah, excellent points. Yeah, John, do you have thoughts on that?
Well, just there are a couple of talks, I think, in the conference around using JavaScript in Shiny, because that's often, someone has done it in JavaScript. Like everything has been done in JavaScript, and you can use JavaScript in Shiny. Not easily, but almost easily. Like there are only a few things to learn. And so I have a talk about wrapping JavaScript into packages. Ashley Baldry has a talk Thursday about JavaScript in Shiny. There are tutorials, there are workshops. That's definitely my place to go for, not the only place, like not necessarily the first place to go. If someone else has already done it in R, great. But if not, wrapping something up from JavaScript can help in a lot of cases.
Yeah, you do need to know a lot. You do need to know a lot about, especially Shiny bindings. I think it's probably the official way to do this. But since it's just us, no one can hear us. Always remember that technically you can always add the JS library and then use custom messages to kind of trigger it. If you even just want to experiment with, can this do what I want? You can technically use set input value and send custom message as a way to kind of just trigger a specific piece of JS, and just test it up before you wrap it into a package.
Yeah, and there are different layers or different levels of what you need, depending on how integrated that JavaScript is, how much of a workhorse it is. So, yeah, and yes, John Cohen has the book JavaScript for R.
This is about to plug that book. It's on my bookshelf. I love it.
One very
Yep.
specific issue that I've run into in this area is that you can go find the JavaScript, somehow wrap it in, or be happy with an R package. Someone already did it. But what sometimes happens is that this package is not maintained anymore, and sometimes even the author don't even respond to pull requests. So in that case, I have ended up using a fork of my own and just load that with the package because I could fix it. It was just a version update, and it worked fine after that. But sometimes it can be you're relying on other people to do it for you, and that can sometimes create some friction, which is not something you can't overcome. But kind of knowing a bit of JavaScript certainly helps, and I can say also that that book is really a great help in that regard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have been keeping track of a few questions from the audience, so we might take a couple minutes to address some of those. One that came a little bit earlier, maybe some of us have thoughts on this, is that if you're dealing with confidential, maybe in a health context, patient data, are you taking any steps for security and making sure that that's kept in the right way? Now, this somewhat is up my wheelhouse as being in life sciences. We deal with confidential data every day. For us, the key is making sure that applications are not hard coding, or I should say that they're deployed in a situation where only those that need to access it. So there are products like Posit Connect that will let you control access to that, but you could also put that in front of or in behind other authentication mechanisms. You want to tailor how that data is being used. But I don't know if other people on the panel here have had to deal with apps that use confidential data and how you've handled security around those.
I think one of the ways that we dealt with it was sort of separating them out. So we had sort of two repositories, one repository just for the app that shows the data that's allowed to be public, and all of the pre-processing is sort of done in an R package separately, so users never have access to the data behind the summary statistics that they're seeing.
Yeah, excellent point. Others have situations like this?
This comes up a lot because we work with a lot of small and big pharma. A lot of them just have their own internal R Connect, so we don't have to worry about it.
Exactly.
If it's behind their firewall, but then some clients are like, well, I don't want to have it behind my firewall. And I'm like, okay, well, then, you have to, if it needs to be HIPAA compliant, you basically have to spin up an AWS HIPAA compliant instance, right? And set it up there. Because Shiny Apps IO, they don't have any kind of like HIPAA compliant enforced policies. They basically inherit AWS US East security policies. So I tell clients, I'm like, look, it's as secure as, AWS. I tend to trust that a lot more than, small internal IT groups, but it really comes down to sometimes just what the client's comfortable with as well. If they really have to adhere to HIPAA, or if they have PHI or PII. Sometimes we've even anonymized or hashed out patient identifiers in an app, and then they're okay with Shiny Apps. So yeah, it becomes kind of a case-by-case basis sometimes.
Yeah, I would maybe just add that sometimes clients already have their own authentication, and it can be just the work of making this work with your application itself. So Connect supports a lot of different types, for example, but sometimes you can also do this authorization and authentication on the infrastructure side. So there might be some. I think the final answer is that it just depends. It depends a lot on the client, but yes,
Sure.
it is something that you should always keep in mind. Probably the easiest way to do this is Connect. Connect and making sure that you follow best practices and there's no password or no endpoints kind of visible in the code, just in case.
Yeah, excellent points. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat about making sure that any early versions of the app that you're using random data most of the time for prototyping, that certainly is a great example as well that speaks to my industry. And I have kept my eye on the chat. Speaking of chat, there's been a bit of chatter about ChatGPT and kind of where that might impact things. Sounds like, Tanya, you had some thoughts you wanted to share about that.
Yeah, and I know John does too, so I'll try to be quick. It's all the rage right now, right? I've been having a lot of fun with Midjourney, the art generator, which I think is, I guess, Stable Diffusion might have been the precursor to that. So the random AI art, and then ChatGPT, of course, is all the rage. I haven't seen any way to directly connect to any of these except through a company called Base 10. They have a new product. I think it's blueprint.base10.co. And I was able to very quickly set up my own kind of API to Stable Diffusion. And then I connected from Shiny Apps.io to that. So I have my own little art Stable Diffusion generator.
Ooh, fun.
And again, I don't know what, the point is of all this right now, other than it's cool. I've been just having fun with it, but I would love to know about more ways to kind of connect to either, ChatGPT through R or Shiny and just play around with it.
I know there's at least one ChatGPT package on CRAN to interface with the API. I did not write this one.
You can't write everything, John.
No. I started one, but I didn't get there. That one, asterisk that's not a free API. So,
Sure.
Be careful what you're doing there. I've used ChatGPT with like cleaning up code. I don't trust it for actually generating code, but sometimes I'll just dump in like one of the packages that I'm working on, say, okay, here's the code. What doesn't make sense, or what can I simplify, or things like that. And it makes things up. It says, oh yeah, use this function that doesn't exist with these arguments to this other function that don't exist. So you have to be really careful. You can't just copy and paste the code. Apparently GPT-4 is even better. So might be getting there to where you can, but still it's a collaborative tool, not just something to trust to do everything for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
That's the general idea. But I have and then I guess the other asterisk is only do this with public code.
Yes.
Because anything you put into ChatGPT, you are feeding to OpenAI.
Yeah.
They now have your code. So yeah.
I was gonna say it's good for things like if you need to generate a regular expression and you just describe what your regular expression needs to do. It's good for things like it's written scraping code in RVest for me. That actually was correct. So then I don't have to go and do all the, find the selector, inspect, find the whatever. It kind of does that heavy lifting for you. And yeah, it wasn't always perfect, but you could kind of, like you said, you iterate on it.
Yeah.
But it saves some of that manual Googling, I feel like, at times.
I also find it's really useful for rubber ducking, where you just explain the problem to someone in order to figure it out yourself. Well, ChatGPT is actually interactive at that. So even if it doesn't solve it, it often helps me realize what I'm doing wrong. I say often, I've used it a handful of times. But the idea of it seems pretty intriguing. And it has definitely found places where I had code that was kind of overcomplicated. And it's like, hey, why don't you do this? Like, oh yeah, that's much better. So that's how I do it.
A reminder: there's a plugin for VS Code.
Yes, there is.
So if you want to play around with it,
there's also a plugin for RStudio, by the way. GPT Studio, I think, is what they.
I remember that coming through our weekly.
Yeah.
Ones. Yep. Mm-hmm.
So,
I think we don't really have time for this discussion. I know that we're a little later today for it. I do have some reservations, especially when it comes to highly regulated industries. Even just having someone generate a code for a function for you, even if they don't have access to the code and they're just generating the function itself, there might be some gray areas here, because technically the code, you will need to validate the code, definitely.
Right. For sure.
So I'm also kind of curious to see where this goes.
Yep. That could be a whole nother panel discussion altogether. I'm keeping my eye on it too, but we're going to have to wrap up here quickly. But before we go, I'm going to let each of you tell me what is your favorite package in the Shiny ecosystem, but you cannot just say Shiny itself. So we'll give you like a sentence or two to say that out. So we'll start with you, John. What would be your favorite?
Well, this came up in our pre-chat that I'm going to go out there a little bit and I'll say test that. Like putting tests in your Shiny apps makes your Shiny apps so much better. So even though it's not at all a Shiny specific package, test that.
Awesome. Awesome. How about you, Nicola?
I'm going to go for Shiny Browser. This is our package that lets you get some information about a user's browser. I used it quite recently, and it solved a very niche problem with one line of code. And so that sums up packages that I like that solve my problems for me.
Awesome. Awesome. And Tanya?
Oh man, there's a lot, but I would probably say, well, test that, of course, but I just discovered, thanks to this conference, the Shiny Test 2 package, where
Yes.
yeah, it kind of writes the test for you. You just click around and it does all the work, so that's cool. But Reactable is really nice. I've been using that for really just nice interactive tables. I don't always like tables. I don't want to just replicate Excel, but my clients love tables sometimes. Sometimes they're necessary. So Reactable kind of makes them, a lot more useful.
Awesome. And Peter, how about you?
Tanya just said it. It's Reactable, hands down.
I'm a big fan of that as well. And Pedro?
Yeah, eCharts4R. I think we didn't. No one actually said it. And I will add one more just because of the Shiny Test 2. WebShot 2, which is the basis under Shiny Test 2 that actually takes the screenshots. And I was really happy that someone made this because I really needed this at some time ago, and it was like the perfect fit.
Awesome. And then my quick one, I could pick many. I'm going to say BSLib because it made a fun app for visualizing game racing data that we did in live stream. So much fun. So BSLib for the win there. But in any event, we've got the rest of the conference to watch now, but I want to give a huge thank to our panel for joining me on this special episode of the Shiny Developer Series. And again, every time we get a group of us together, I got like 5 or 10 things. I'm like, I'm looking at that right after this. So thank you for the great insights. And again, it's great to be part of this community. And for everyone watching, enjoy the rest of the conference. And thank you to Absalon for having us. So thank you again.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.